Welcome to the Fit Vegan Podcast, the show where we help you optimize your health, fitness, and mindset on a whole food, plant-based lifestyle. My name is Maxime. I am a former triathlete, powerlifter, bodybuilder, and basketball player, and I've been vegan for over 9 years. I'm also the founder and CEO of Fit Vegan Coaching, which has helped over 500 vegans from 20 different countries to completely transform their bodies and their health. I'm excited for you to hear today's episode. Let's get into the show. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fit Vegan Podcast. Today, I am joined by Paul Shapiro, who's the CEO of the Better Meat Co. and the author of the national bestseller, Clean Meat: How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner and the World. He's a 5-time Tedx speaker and the host of the Business for Good podcast. And in 2023, he was named the most admired CEO by the Sacramento Business Journal. Paul, how are you doing today, man?
Maxime, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Very excited to kind of dive into obviously your businesses, the work that you're doing. But I always like to give a little background story because no one ends up there without having a reason to. And so what brought you to the plant-based vegan space that made you want to start these companies?
In short, a love of animals. So when I was a kid, Maxime, I really liked animals a lot. But to me, that really was like being a dog lover, right? I thought I was an animal lover because I love my dogs. And I grew up in a household. We always had 3 or 4 rescue dogs. My mom worked at our local animal shelter. And this was something that, I considered our dogs to be members of the family, right? They were not pieces of property. They were like my siblings. In fact, I probably loved them more than some of my biological family members at sometimes. But when I turned 13, a friend of mine showed me a video about what happens to animals on factory farms and in slaughter plants. Now, keep in mind, this is like 1993, right? So there was no YouTube, no internet. This was like a VHS tape that he put into a VCR. And for those of your listeners who are under a certain age, a VHS was like a big rectangular piece of plastic that you put inside of a box that showed you videos.
And you had to rewind it every time you wanted to watch a new movie. You wanted to rewatch a movie.
In fact, if you rented them from, Blockbuster or wherever, there would always be a sign on it that said, "Be kind, please rewind." That was like, always like, something that is totally irrelevant to today's population. But for us 30 years ago, it was a big deal. It was always very annoying when you rented a VHS tape and it hadn't been rewound. You're like, what type of a jerk doesn't rewind? So anyway, the point is that I watched this video and I saw my dogs in the video, I saw chickens and pigs and cows hanging upside down in slaughter plants. I saw them locked inside of cages on factory farms. And I thought, what if that happened to my dogs? And I knew there was nothing that I wouldn't do to stop that from happening to my dogs. And of course, my first reaction was, we need to stop these people from doing this horrible things. And I realized like they were doing it for me, right? Like I was paying to buy meat, or my parents were paying to buy meat for me at that time. And it became clear to me that if I didn't want that type of cruelty to befall my own dogs, I shouldn't want it for any animal. And so I became a vegetarian. And then I started writing to the animal protection groups, like snail mail letters, although we didn't call it snail mail at that time. It was just mail. And I started writing to them and asking them to send me information about vegetarian eating. And they sent me back information about what I thought was pronounced vegan eating. And I was like, what is this vegan? And it's like a couple of weeks have passed and I've been a vegetarian. I was a very proud new vegetarian, had all the fervor of like this new convert. And then I'm reading about these vegans and I thought, that is not possible. Like I thought, like it must be kind of like holding your breath, like if you hold your breath, you can hold your breath for a certain amount of time, but you do it too long, you'll die. And so I kind of thought, well, being one of these vegans must be impossible. And then I started volunteering at local animal protection nonprofit organizations. And I met these people who I learned were called vegans, and they actually looked quite healthy. And many of them had been doing it for quite some time. And then I picked up a brochure and it had Carl Lewis. Now, Maxime, you probably know who Carl Lewis is. Others who weren't around back in the 90s might not know this, but he was kind of like the Usain Bolt or the Michael Phelps of that era, like the premier top Olympian in the world. And I worshiped Carl Lewis. Like I had posters of him in my bedroom. Like I really thought he was amazing. And in this interview, Carl Lewis was talking about that the years that he was vegan were the years that he won the most gold medals. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, first of all, now you're telling me that not only can people survive, but the best athlete who I worship is also vegan. It's
Yeah.
incredible. And so I decided, this is a few weeks now after going vegetarian, that I would become vegan. And 30 years later, I'm still doing it. And I was very pleased to see recently, I bought some silk soy milk, and I saw that Carl Lewis was the like the model on the front of the carton. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're marketing to middle-aged men like me, because I don't think too many 20-year-olds know who Carl Lewis is. But anyway,
Yeah.
the
They know
point
their
is,
avatar.
right? Yeah, that's exactly right. So anyway, Carl Lewis is still around. He's on silk soy milk packages. So that's pretty cool. So anyway, that was my origin of how I became vegan in the first place, and then I really devoted my life to this cause of how to stop the war on animals. And we are waging a war on animals. It's an
Yeah.
unprovoked war. It's a one-sided war, but we are waging a war of extermination on wild animals, and of like just abject systematic cruelty on animals who we own, mainly in the form of chickens and pigs and cows and so on.
Yeah.
And so in high school, I started an animal protection club that became an organization. It was called Compassion Over Killing, that eventually morphed into Animal Outlook. And I ran the organization for several years after college as well. Then I left and joined the Humane Society for about 13 years, where I essentially acted as a lobbyist to try to pass laws to get farm animals better conditions, so banning
Mhm.
cages and crates for confining them. And then eventually I came to think that food technology and food innovation were going to do even more than what I was doing to
Yeah.
help liberate animals. And so I wrote a book, as you mentioned. The book is called Clean Meat: How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner in the World. And that book really chronicles the entrepreneurs, the investors, the scientists who are all racing to commercialize slaughter-free meat. And at
Yeah.
the end of the book tour, I had a choice. I could continue writing about the people who I thought were going to solve this problem, or I could just become one of them. And that's when I decided to start the Better Meat Co., which is 5.5 years ago. I'm happy to chat more about what we're doing, but that's basically my entire life in a few minutes for you there, Maxime.
Well, that's beautiful. I got a few questions for you. Like, again, it
Okay.
might be a weird question, but who's your friend that was 13 renting videotapes of animal slaughter? Was he vegan too?
Yeah, no, in fact, he did not show it to me in like an evangelical way, right? He wasn't showing it to me to say, oh, this is so horrible. So for people who were around back then, you may remember that there was like a popular genre of films like called Faces of Death. And Faces of Death were like these crazy videos that like teenage boys liked to watch. And it literally showed lots of people and animals dying. And it wasn't, it was like, here's somebody's face while he's being executed. It was horrible to watch. Like,
Yeah.
here's somebody's face as he's hanging at the gallows. It was like really, really the type of stuff that induces nightmares. And so
Yeah.
my friend
Movies
showed
have
it to me
changed
like
a little
that.
bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, that's right. And so my friend was showing it to me in that vein. It wasn't like he was like, oh, isn't it sad what they do to these animals? He was showing it to me as in like, dude, this is so sick. Look at this. This is incredible. Like, look what happens inside of
Yeah.
slaughterhouses. My reaction, though, was like, how could we ever allow this type of violence and cruelty? I was in total shock. And I don't
Yeah.
remember what I thought before that. I don't remember how I thought meat was made. I'm sure that I knew meat came from animals, but I just hadn't really thought about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and sadly, my friend never became vegetarian. I wish that he would have, but at least he had this catalytic effect on me.
Yeah. And ultimately, you're helping thousands and thousands of people now with the work that you're doing. I do find you hear a lot of stories of like when someone goes vegan as a kid, that you just stay vegan. It's a lot easier, I feel, to, let's say, convert a child because they're more sensitive to seeing some of those
Mm,
videos. You see so many videos on TikTok or Instagram where the kid's like, is this chicken? It's like, I don't want to eat this anymore. This is like the chicken we have in the backyard. But as
yeah.
adults, I feel like we've become so numb to it. So I think there's something there in terms of like impact. That's why I like working with moms and dads, because then you just have like a
Mm.
direct impact on the family.
Yeah, so look, when you're a kid, obviously these are formative years. You're far more open to change than adults are. You don't have decades of inertia and habit that are ingrained in you when you're a kid. And I think also
Yeah.
for a lot of kids, and I expect this was probably true for me as well. There is like a sense of wanting to rebel, and this was like a way to do it, I think. So, I think it would be it would be one thing to say, "Oh, I just did this selflessly for animals." I do think a lot of kids want to rebel. They want to stick out, be different from their parents, and so on. And this might be one way to do it. So, I'm for whatever it takes to help animals. So if that's the motivation for kids, great. That's wonderful. When we come to a place where vegetarianism is the norm, that won't be useful anymore. But for
Yeah.
now, I think a lot of kids do it as an act of rebellion, honestly.
Yeah. And good. We'll take it for now. At least it gets them
Yeah,
started in the
yeah.
right direction. I was
Yeah.
looking at your website. I love your missions page, right? Of like the evolution of how we came to basically farming animals at that point. Do you mind kind of going over that for the listeners and the whole logic and the progression of how we got to where we are?
Sure. So if you think about the history of humanity's meat consumption, which goes back to the very beginning of humanity, right? Like humans have eaten meat since the dawn of humanity. And our, chimpanzees, our closest relatives, they also eat meat. All of the tribal cultures, indigenous cultures eat meat. There's no getting around the fact that humans have eaten meat for a very long time, even in fact, before we became Homo sapiens. And so this is something that's really ingrained in us. We really want to do it. This is why when poor cultures start escaping poverty and they start getting more money and having a more of a middle class, one of the very first things they do is add meat to their diet. So the nations on earth where meat demand is rising the fastest are in places like China and India, because lots of people are escaping poverty, which is obviously great. But one of the side effects is that they eat a lot more meat. And
Yeah.
so it's very clear people want to eat meat, and so even the studies from animal advocacy groups show that generally 8 or 9 out of 10 people who become vegetarians stop being vegetarian. So
Mm.
it's not so easy to do as as it might seem to somebody like you and myself who have been vegans for a long time. We think of it as kind of second nature, but to a lot of people there are a lot of social pressures and so on. And so now to
Yeah.
answer your question directly, Maxime, if you think about going back to the dawn of humanity, the way that we ate meat was through hunting animals, right? Like we
Yeah.
snuck up on animals and killed them. There's some evidence that we were a scavenging species as well, that we basically scavenged off of the carcasses of predators who had killed animals, or scavenged off of the prey animals who've been killed by predators. But there's also ample evidence that humans hunted hundreds of thousands of years ago in the form of cave paintings and so many other pieces of evidence too.
Yeah.
And so that's how we began. And then once we started domesticating animals, many thousands of years ago, even as early as maybe like 10,000 years ago, we started domesticating animals to make them easier for us to kill. So we made them more docile, more dependent on us, and we started corralling them so they were easier for us to slaughter. Then you go to around the early 20th century when we began factory farming animals, which is when instead of just domesticating animals and corralling them, we started locking them on factory farms. And this really sped up after World War II, where we industrialized our agricultural system and we started having tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, and now millions of animals on single properties. I've been in egg barns where there's literally a million animals per barn. And
Crazy.
so the way you accomplish this is, of course, through extreme overcrowding, oftentimes locking animals in tiny cages where they can barely move their whole lives. And so
Yeah.
what I believe is the best next step is not to try to revert to 19th century agricultural practices or meat consumption practices from 100,000 years ago. Rather, it's to take the next step and divorce the meat experience from animals altogether, to allow humanity the ability to continue enjoying the experience of meat consumption, but in a way that doesn't harm animals and that is far lighter on the planet and better for our health. And so that could come through plants, through plant-based meat, through eating, peas and wheat and soy that are made to taste like animals. It could
Yeah.
come through animal cell culture, where we grow actual animal cells but without the animals, and it can come from fungi making mycoproteins that do a really great job of mimicking the meat experience as well. It's kind of like clean energy. You can make energy without fossil fuels in lots of ways. You can do
Yeah.
wind energy, solar energy, geothermal energy, nuclear energy, and so on. Well, the same is so with meat. You can recreate the meat experience in a number of ways that don't involve animals, that are quite different from one another. And that's really what the body of my work is about promoting and advancing, is these technologies that can satiate humanity's meat tooth, so to speak, without
Yeah.
animals.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So the Better Meat Co. Obviously, I was going through their website. You talk about Mycoprotein, which I guess is primarily what you guys are using. Are you guys also doing the lab grown meat as well, or just focusing on the Mycoprotein?
No. So we do sell to some of the cultivated meat companies who are actually growing animal cells so they can combine our mycoproteins with their animal cells, but we don't do animal cell culture. What we're
Okay.
doing is essentially taking microbial fungi and subjecting them to a very special kind of fermentation that within less than one single day transforms them into a whole food, unprocessed, high protein, meat-like product that you can use as an ingredient in alternative meats and so on.
So that's crazy. So through fermentation, it's basically increasing the protein content. Because that was my other question. Is it high in protein, considering that it's like mushroom has some protein, but it's not really high in protein? So it's increasing the protein content through the fermentation process, where you're able to achieve like a higher content of protein versus if you just like mash a bunch of mushrooms together.
So let's back up a second, Maxime, and talk about the fungi kingdom, if you don't mind, because I'm a huge fungi fanatic. So 90% of fungi species don't produce mushrooms. So oftentimes people think of fungi and mushroom as synonyms. They are not. Mushrooms are the fruiting body of a fungi. It's like the apple. It's like the apple on the tree, right? But mycelium is the root-like structure that goes underneath the ground. And mycelium is very different from mushrooms. In fact, again, most fungi species never produce mushrooms at all. Most fungi species, you can have mycelium without mushrooms ever. And so we're not getting mushrooms to be higher protein. What we're doing is growing mycelium that is in and of itself high protein already. And so the mycelium, or the mycoprotein, this MYCO protein that we grow, has more protein than eggs. It's a complete protein with all the amino acids. The PDCAS score, the protein digestibility adjusted score, which shows like how digestible something is higher than beef, has a better PDCAS score than beef. And so we should think about fungi as very different from plants and very different from animals, because they are not in the same kingdom. A lot of the times people think of fungi and plants as being very similar. Actually, fungi are far more similar, evolutionarily speaking, to animals than they are to plants. I mean, just think about it. Plants, you have to put in the sun and they photosynthesize, and that's how they eat. Fungi don't do that. That's why they're not green. They don't photosynthesize. They, like animals, have to go out and find their food and digest it. That's how they eat. Plants, they breathe in CO2 and they breathe out oxygen. Well, fungi are so much more similar to us animals, that they breathe in oxygen and they breathe out CO2. And so it's not surprising that the fungi kingdom offers far more meat-like textures to the so-called flesh of the fungi than plants do. That's why you have to do a lot to plants to make them taste like animals, because you're traveling so far from one end of the evolutionary tree, from plants, all the way over to animals. But fungi, again, are way closer to the animal kingdom. And so, in short, you start out with a much better place, far more meat-like, far higher protein content. I mean, just on a dry weight basis, Maxime, think about like a chickpea, which maybe is around 20% protein if you're lucky. You get a good strain, like 20% protein. Whereas our mycoprotein on a dry weight basis is more than double that. It's almost about 50% protein on a dry weight basis. And unlike the chickpea, it's a complete protein with all the amino acids. It also is higher in zinc than beef. It's higher in iron than beef. And it naturally contains vitamin B12, which of course is absent typically from a plant-based diet. Now, we're not supplementing with B12. That's just naturally in there as a product of the fermentation. So this is a true superfood. It is a whole food that's unprocessed, that is more meat-like than the plant protein isolates that are used to make plant-based meat today. Now, I'm not knocking plant-based meat. I like plant-based meat. I eat it regularly. But this is a better way. Creates a better texture in a less processed way.
That's interesting. I did not know all of that about fungi. And I did not know that you would have absorbable sources of B12, of iron and zinc within the mycoprotein.
I can't recommend mycoprotein enough. In fact, if you look at the studies that have been done on mycoprotein, like muscle synthesis after workouts, highly advantageous and comparable to things like whey and egg white protein and so on.
Okay, perfect. Well, to put into context, a lot of people that listen to this show are either thinking of transitioning or are already vegan and want to optimize what it is that they're doing. A lot of our listeners are whole food plant-based, because a lot of my businesses are built around whole food plant-based. So where would that fall in that category for the mycoproteins? I know the process is very simple, right? That I saw on your website. It's not like there's a bunch of processing or chemicals that goes into making it.
No, it's a single ingredient that is a whole food. So let me start over from how you make plant-based meat, just really briefly. Right now, to make a Beyond Burger, which again, while it's not Whole Foods plant-based, I'm not knocking them. I love the company. I like their products. I think their Beyond Steak is actually quite terrific. All that said, You have to grow a field of peas, harvest that field of peas, mill it into a pea flour. That flour is very low in protein. So then you have to extract out the fat, extract out the fiber. So you concentrate that into like a pea protein powder that you might take as like a supplement, as a post-workout supplement, right? So
Yeah.
that pea protein powder is basically just, peas that have been milled into a flour and had the fat and the fiber removed. So per gram, you have way more protein.
Yeah.
Now, that's now high protein, but it is not textured like animal meat. Obviously, it's a powder. So then you got to
Yeah.
subject it to something called twin screw extrusion, which is basically a fancy way of saying lots of pressure and lots of heat. That changes the molecular structure of the protein to go from globular, which plant proteins are, to stringy, like animal proteins. And
Yeah.
then you get what's called textured pea protein, or it's like a TVP, a texturized vegetable protein. And this is a really cool technology. It's great, but it's a lot of processing. And so
Yeah.
what we are doing is creating the meat-like texture simply through fermentation while keeping it a whole food. No extraction, no isolation, no extrusion, simply by fermentation alone. We can create a meat-like texture product in a whole food, all natural state. And the only thing that we do to it is chop it up and dry it. That's it. It's like,
Mhm.
it's like the equivalent of buying chopped up dried mushrooms, except imagine the mushrooms are just much higher protein.
Yeah.
And we're doing it through mycelium.
And how do you guys get them to look the way that they do? Because you have some great photos on your website. So how do you get them to look that way?
Yeah,
Because
so
most
we can
vegan
basically
burgers don't look that good.
yeah, so we can take the mycoprotein and essentially form it into a patty in that particular case, if you want to make a burger. Form it
Mhm.
into a patty, and it's very simple. You do things like adding vegetable juice to make it that color. You might add a little bit of oil to, like an unsaturated fat oil to make it a little bit juicier, because the mycoprotein itself essentially has almost no fat in it at all.
Yeah.
And then you can add some yeast extracts to impart different flavors that you want to add. So we don't sell the burgers. It's not like we're a B2B ingredients company. We sell to food companies. You're not going to go out and
Yeah.
find the Better Meat Co. on a store shelf. But what you are going to do is see us selling to other companies, and those companies can use our ingredients to make really great products.
And so for the people listening that do want to try the product, what are companies that you guys are working with that they can go and kind of like try it out through
Yeah.
them?
Yeah, unfortunately, so I'm going to answer your question directly, Maxime, but unfortunately, we are still a small startup. We got 24 full-time employees. We have a pilot plant here in Sacramento, California. We are not producing millions of pounds so that we could, go out and be in thousands of grocery stores. We want to
Yeah.
do that. We need to raise the capital in order to build a much bigger factory. The factory we
Yeah.
have allows us to do pilot plant stuff. So we put things in local restaurants in Northern California and so on.
Okay.
However, if you want to go out and get mycoprotein, which in any supermarket, there is one way to do it, and that's corn, Quorn.
Yeah.
And corn is in most major supermarkets. They do have some products that are vegan. Some of them, they've added egg whites to the mycoprotein, but they do have some vegan products, and they're very clearly labeled as vegan. And
Yeah.
I buy the corn spicy chicken patties very frequently. They're really good. And so they're made out of mycoprotein. And so what I
Okay.
would recommend, is if you want to add more mycoprotein to your diet, really the way to do it at this time is to go buy the vegan corn products. Again, that's Quorn. And
Yeah.
in the future, when the Better Meat Co. is at better scale, then you'll be able to get products with our ingredients too. We are not there yet, unfortunately. We're aiming to be.
Okay. Yeah. Corn is very popular in the UK. I got a lot of
It
that from my
is.
UK clients.
Yeah, I actually was in the UK recently, and I saw that on the KFC menu, that really big on, like, advertised on the digital menu when you walk in, is a corn vegan chicken patty that is marketed
Nice.
for the same exact price as the conventional chicken patty. So, corn in the UK is already on fast food menus at price parity with animal-based meat, with something that is delicious. It's really good. Now, like, if you're a Whole Foods plant-based person, it's a deep fried patty, right? You're not going to go get it. But if you're going to KFC and you have a choice between getting fried chicken or fried mycoprotein, I'll tell you, get the mycoprotein. It's really good.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, I'm gonna give that a shot. I've heard about corn and I saw it in Whole
Yeah.
Foods here because I'm in LA, so I'm just like south of
Oh,
you.
cool. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, you,
So
you can go get the vegan ones there. Go get the spicy chicken patties. They're really good. Another thing I like about them is that they come in a cardboard box with no plastic, so there's no plastic bag or a liner or anything. It's just the patties in a cardboard box. So that's also favorable for other reasons too.
Okay. Well, just now, selfish question. You mentioned a few restaurants in Sacramento around your area. So I do happen to go up there. We do have a bunch of clients up there. Yeah.
Oh,
Any
cool.
restaurant that you can like drop that we can like go and test out?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, Maxime, if you're in Sacramento, come by the Better Meat Co. We want to do a special tasting just for you. But we put a steak on the menu at Bennett's, which is a steakhouse here in Sacramento. In San Francisco, we make a microbial fungi foie gras that is sold at restaurants, like high-end restaurants. So one of them is called like Reve, which is Reve.
Okay.
And so those are a couple options. But we do a lot of things. And in fact, we're looking to put that foie gras on the menu in OA pretty soon. So stay tuned if you want to get a microbial fungi foie gras, goose free. The ducks celebrate the geese and the ducks celebrate this foie gras instead of lamenting it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because when I have business meetings, sometimes it's not always at a vegan restaurant. So, the traditional business meeting is you go to a steakhouse and I'm like, do you have like a block of tofu somewhere in the back that you can like cook for me? So that's great that I have that option. So I'm excited to see it in more restaurants.
We're working on it. Scale is the biggest issue for us. So supply right now is greatly outstripped by demand at the Better Meat Co. Like the key for us is to raise the capital needed to build a much bigger factory so that we can start to scratch the surface of all the demand that we have. But our demand is just for better or worse through the roof. Whereas we only have one fermenter. So, fermenter is like a farm. Imagine if you have a farm that's only 1 acre, you can only sell so much product, even if there's much more demand. So we need much bigger fermenters or much bigger farms, so to speak, in order to start really penetrating the mainstream with our mycoprotein ingredient.
Okay. Are you guys publicly traded company or are you guys private?
Nope, we're private, but we're in the midst of a financing round right now. So if somebody listens wants to own a piece of the Better Meat Co., we'd love to hear from you. Just get in touch with us via the website. It's bettermeat.co. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, well, we can talk after this podcast.
Okay.
Oh, it's so beautiful. So I was listening to Ritual's podcast when I was doing my research for you. So did you try lab grown meat?
I have eaten
I think
it,
you were
yes.
sharing about that, and you're like, it was like a weird dilemma of like it's vegan, but it's not vegan. It's like, can you share that experience?
Yeah.
Because someone was talking about it on Simon Hill, and then on Ritual and a bunch of podcasts, and I was like, you know what? I don't know if I would eat it. If it was steak, but it wasn't like an animal wasn't killed for it. I was like, it's this weird dilemma.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that nobody cares whether you eat it, Maxime, because the point is not for vegans to eat it, right? It's for meat consumers to eat it. So nobody really cares. The purveyors of these products are not trying to market it to vegans. So, they don't want to take away market share from, Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods or from the tofu manufacturers. All of that said, the reason that I became vegan 30 years ago was to prevent animal cruelty. It's not because I am, have some spiritual problem, with like eating animals or something. It was just to prevent the suffering of animals. And as a result, when I have been confronted with the choice of whether to accept a free sample of cultivated meat, which again is real meat grown from animal cells for which animals were not slaughtered. I've done it. And I've done it, one, so I can write about the experience, because I continue to write for newspapers and magazines about this particular field, and I'd like to be informed about these products by eating them. But also because I have no ethical concern. There may be people who say something along the lines of what you just did, which is, I don't feel comfortable eating it. And that's fine. No problem. But there's no ethical reason not to eat it. And there may be other people who are listening who are saying, oh, well, it's not healthy, so I'm not going to eat it. And that's fine too. If you think that meat is inherently unhealthy, that's fine. What I have noticed, though, is that those same vegans don't really seem to have a problem when they see their, social media feeds filled with all the latest vegan donuts and vegan fried chicken and vegan Kit Kats. Nobody's complaining that, oh, it's not healthy, right? They're just happy because it's a vegan Kit Kat. And so I question whether that's really the motivation. I think that some people just have a reflexive knee-jerk reaction against meat, and that's fine. I hope they remain vegetarian or vegan for the rest of their lives. But for the 9 out of 10 people who do eat meat, this is a really important way that they can do it without harming animals. And I don't think that the world is going to switch from eating meat to just enjoying lentil soups, lentil soup and hummus wraps and rice and
black
bean
bean
burritos.
burgers. Yeah.
Right. I'd be thrilled. That would be great. It would be much easier.
Yeah.
It would be much easier. Sadly, all of the evidence suggests that that is not so, that people want meat, and we have to give them the experience. It'd be kind of like saying, I wish everybody would walk and bike places. Well, that would be great, but people want cars. Most people want to have a car. And so we need to make cars that don't rely on fossil fuels. Like, that is the pathway. And so it's great. I mean, if somebody says, hey, I'm going to devote my life to trying to make cities more walkable and have bike lanes, that's fantastic. Nobody's arguing against it.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't be knocking electric cars, because that is part of the solution. And the same is so here. If you want to just tell people to eat lentil soup and rice and bean burritos, that's great. I love those foods myself. But we need something for virtually all of humanity that wants to eat meat. And we got to divorce the meat experience from animals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I agree with you on that, right? Again, my whole mission is to help people eat more plant-based, right? If I get someone to eat 70, 80%, 90% more plant-based, that's a huge difference on their health.
The world would be transformed if everybody did that. I'd gladly give my life for people to cut back on meat by 70%. I would die very happy. So, I always say, like, look, if you start out with a meatless Monday, that's great. Applaud yourself. If you want to do something like what Mark Bittman, the cookbook writer, says, which is that he's vegan before 6 p.m. and after 6 p.m. he eats whatever he wants, that's another big step. Now you're cutting 2/3 of the meat out. Or you can do what I do. You can do what I do, which is vegan before 6 p.m. and vegan after 6 p.m. too. So, that's another way to do it.
The best alternative.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So, question for you on the mycoprotein. So, because it is plant-based, I'm assuming that there's like no cholesterol in there. There's none of the stuff that you would typically find in meat, because I forgot to cover that earlier.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to call it plant-based, I don't think it's that misleading, but it's not plants, it's fungi, right? So, most people, like, if you go to a restaurant and they're serving a portobello sandwich and they call it plant-based, nobody's going to accuse them of false advertising, obviously, right?
Yeah.
But we all know a portobello mushroom is not a plant. It's part of the fungi kingdom. It's a mushroom. So I don't know if I'd call it plant-based, but either way, yes, it has no cholesterol at all. In fact, studies show that eating mycoprotein can help reduce your total cholesterol because it's really high in fiber, greatly rich in beta glucans. So, these are foods that can help reduce cholesterol while getting a lot of protein. And as people, protein is really important. But fiber is also really important. And most Americans are not deficient in protein, and nearly all Americans are deficient in fiber. And our fiber standards are pretty low, and people don't really hit it anyway. And so this is a good way where you can get the protein that you want, but also getting the fiber that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited for people to check it out. Again, for everyone listening, I'll put all the link down below to his book, to the company, to your podcast, to everything that you have in there.
Thank you.
And then I'll get the list of some of the restaurant that you mentioned below, so people can check it out if they are in that area and they want to try it out. I will definitely let you know once I come up north.
Great. We're going to serve you a whole feast here, Maxime, when you get here. It'll be fun.
Oh, beautiful. I'm excited to try that and document that, because I document everything.
Okay, great. Come on by. Yeah, we'd love to have you. I think that my wife, Tony, as well. And so when you come up here, we'll have you over after you come to the Better Meat Co too.
Perfect. We'll get a workout in. We'll get you that 6-pack, Paul.
I would love that. Yeah, I'm looking at you. I'm thinking, like, God, this guy's body fat must be like 10%, right? And I've been struggling. Like, I have one of these scales that tells me like all the data on you, and I weigh myself every day, and I can't get below 14%. Like, I'm at 14% body fat, and I do. I mean, I go lifting. I try to eat a high protein diet. But I would love to get a 6-pack. It would be a great achievement. I'm now like 44 years old, so it's presumably a little bit more difficult than it was a couple of decades ago. But in Maxime, I trust. So if you have suggestions that you think I should be doing, I'll be all ears. I promise you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's chat after the podcast, because the people we typically work with is like 45 to 75. We got people that are like 53, 60, getting 6-packs for the first time in their life. So it's doable, right? It's just with the right structure.
And they're using TRT and HGH, right? They're
exactly. Just a few needles, get whole food plant-based exercise. It's a structure. It's literally the same as building a business. If you don't have a good system to scale, the transformation is not going to work. So we have a good system. We know how to be able to scale it and make it sustainable for
Yeah.
you, that you
So
can maintain it.
how much of the six pack is made in the gym versus made in the kitchen?
5% in the gym, 95% in the kitchen.
Wow. Okay. So this is, really helpful. So just, what is it? Just that you got to do really high protein, or there's certain foods you need to exclude? Like I do eat a pretty whole foods plant-based diet.
Yeah.
And not exclusively, but probably like 80-85%, I would say.
Yeah, which is great. Again, it's the
Yeah, but
it's the proportion of your protein in regards to the calories, and
yeah.
then there's a
So
journey to it.
yeah, I will say tofu is not a whole food, so I eat a lot of tofu. So I was thinking of tofu as a whole food, which it is not. So I eat a lot of tofu, so I might have reduced my percentages there down a little bit because of that. But yeah, so basically lower calories, more protein. What percentage of my calories should be coming from protein, do you think?
It's a ratio per gram, not a percentage, because
Okay.
obviously if you weigh a certain amount and you're a certain height with a certain level of activity and we decrease your calories, then your number of protein would go down. It actually needs to go up when you're going in a deficit.
Right. So I know I've read on your social media that, don't consider a food proteinaceous unless it's like got the 1 to 10 rule, right? It's got to be 10% of the gram. Like if it's like, 5 grams of protein, it should be maximum 50 calories.
Yeah, approximately. But for the most part, right, we're looking around like 1.6 gram per kg of body weight. That's a good place to start in terms of protein requirement, right? Which
so
is
I,
pretty
I, I, I weigh 170, which I think was that like 70 something kilos.
So 2.2 times 1.6, that's 124 grams of protein per day, which is pretty easy to hit if you're consuming. Like, again, I do tofu, I do tempeh, I do some edamame, I do lentils and beans. Like those numbers are pretty easy to hit.
Right. And you're using protein powder also, or no?
Yeah, I'll use some protein powder once a day. Flavor the smoothie in terms of, so I'm in a cut right now. So when you're in a cut, you have less calories to hit your amount of protein. So you want to use tools that are going to help you hit that amount of protein on a lower calorie, knowing that it's not a forever thing, because you're not going to be cutting forever, right? The goal is to lose the weight and then speed up your metabolism after, and then keep it off. Then you have more food. Then you don't need to rely on these things anymore. It's just like a tool to the means for a short period of time.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's probably probably content your listeners are interested in as well. I am interested too, but I'm glad to get this for everybody.
Yeah, no, of course. I'm happy we recorded it. And so I want to say, Paul, I always like to end on words of wisdom. Anything that you would like to share with your audience, with what you're working on and kind of what's coming in the future?
Yeah, I would say the following. The world is on fire, quite literally. There's not a lot of time left. We know that fossil fuels and animal agriculture are helping to drive the climate crisis that we're facing. And so, of course, people are concerned about their health. I'm concerned about my health as well. But we have to look at the crisis that we're facing and not fiddle while Rome burns. So my view is that if there is something that you could be doing to help avert the climate catastrophe, to try to help end the war on animals, to try to help slash humanity's reliance on animals for food, don't defer the good that you can do. Start today. So that doesn't mean just looking at yourself and what you consume. That's a good place to start. But I would suggest devote your life to this. And that doesn't mean abandoning your profession. Let's say you're an accountant. Well, there's these alternative protein companies need accountants. Let's say you're a video editor. They need videos, right? I'm not saying, whatever maybe you're an HR professional. They need that too. But there's lots of ways that you can help get off the sidelines and get onto the field and start playing. And again, it's not a game. This is like, we're ushering in a massive age of extinction for all these species who will no longer ever exist because of what we're doing today. And so this isn't something that I would suggest deferring until you're done with school, or deferring until you've made more money and can go do this. Start today. The world needs you.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great message. And again, it's cheaper to go vegan, to be honest with you. It's a lot more affordable than if you're trying to consume meat, especially with how things are going right now. So it'll definitely save on the budget.
Yeah, well, since you bring that up, Maxine, I'll just tell you, this, but for your listeners. So if you want to save money, go to plantbasedonabudget.com. That's my wife's website. And she also has numerous cookbooks under that brand, Plant Based on a Budget and Plant Based on a Budget Quick and Easy. And she'll show you how you can save the planet while also saving yourself a lot of money.
Beautiful. I'll put that link in the below as well for the people listening, if you're on
Cool.
podcast or YouTube.
I've enhanced my status in our marriage by dropping that plug. So I'm going to make sure that she knows I did that.
Good. Brownie points. It's good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Paul, thank you very much for taking the time to jump on the show, man. I really appreciate it. I know the listeners got a lot from it. And for everyone listening, make sure you go check out all the links down below. And Paul, again, thank you very much once again.
Maxime, it's my pleasure. I really admire what you're doing, and I'm grateful to you for all that you're advancing on the plant-based front and the fungi-based front now. Thank you.
Thank you.